You may have noticed before that although the people of Kush and Nubia had skin color and facial features different from Egyptians, yet in many occasions, you see them wearing Egyptian clothes, worshipping Egyptian gods and building pyramids similar to Egyptians but way smaller. And the reason behind this is a process that took place over centuries known as the Egyptianization of Kush Nubia, and that's what we will be talking about in this video. But firstly, let's explain what the term Egyptianization means. It is simply the process of making of a place or practice more Egyptian or more like Egypt. The introduction of Egyptian elements, practices, attitudes, language, clothes, culture, etc. Nubia, which is an ancient region in northeastern Africa, extending approximately from the Nile River Valley near the First Cataract in Upper Egypt, eastward to the shores of the Red Sea, southward to about Khartoum in what is now Sudan, and westward to the Libyan Desert. Nubia is traditionally divided into two regions. The northern part is Lower Nubia, located between the Second and the First Cataract of Aswan. This was called Wawat. The southern part, which extended north to the southern end of the Second Cataract of the Nile and was known as Upper Nubia. This was called Kush under the 18th dynasty and was called Ethiopia by the ancient Greeks. The relationship between Egypt and Kush and Nubia was complicated. At some times they were trading with each other. Since Nubia was known for rich deposits of gold, Nubia was also the gateway through which luxury products like incense, ivory, and ebony traveled from their source in sub-Saharan Africa to Egypt and other Mediterraneans. Bartering cattle, gold, carnelian, ivory, animal skins, and hardwood, Nubians traded with the Egyptians for grain, vegetable oils, wine, beer, linen, and other manufactured goods. And at other times, Egyptians and Nubians were fighting against each other in such a brutal way, to the point that King Sensret III described them like this:
"For they are not respectable people. They are wretches with broken spirits. My majesty has seen them, it is no lie. I captured their women. I carried off their underlings, went to their wells, drove off their bulls, tore out their barley, set fire to it. As my father lives for me, I speak truthfully."
Egypt ruled them for more than 400 years. From around 1560 until 1070 BCE, the Egyptians took possession of all Nubian lands as far as the Fourth Cataract of the Nile. They were conquered and taken as captives, and they were forced to pay tributes in form of gifts. The pharaoh appointed a governor to ensure the annual tribute was paid. They presented the governor with gold, cattle, ivory, ebony, and ostrich feathers. And according to other resources, they even presented slaves. Due to the great influence of Egypt on Kush Nubia, they have been Egyptianized and their society became more like Egypt. For example, they spoke and wrote in Egyptian. They worshipped Egyptian gods and adopted many Egyptian funerary traditions and other Egyptian ideas of the underworld. They wore Egyptian-style clothes. Their archers fought in Egypt's army. Their rulers also built pyramids, although they were smaller and had steeper sides than those of Egypt. Even their temples were built in the Egyptian style, although some of the temples found in Sudan today were actually built by Egyptians during the Egyptian conquest of Nubia. For example, Thutmose III built the Great Temple of Amun below the nearby mountain of Jebel Barkal, which would remain the most important religious site in the country for the rest of its history, with later Egyptian pharaohs such as Ramesses II adding to the Temple of Amun and the city. Thutmose III also established the city of Napata after his conquest of Kush. Napata was clearly influenced by Egyptian culture from its very beginning. Rulers were buried beneath pyramid tombs with Egyptian grave gods. The Egyptianization of Nubia appears to actually have been enhanced during the decline in Egypt's political control over Nubia in the Second Intermediate Period, when Nubians were employed in large numbers as mercenaries against the Asian Hyksos invaders of Egypt, and they absorbed the Egyptian culture while serving in the Egyptian army. Around 1100 BCE, Egypt's new kingdom collapsed, and Kush regained its independence. However, Egyptian culture persisted. After the collapse of the new kingdom, Egypt fell into political chaos. In the mid-700s BC, Kush took advantage of Egypt's vulnerability and Kushite armies invaded Egypt. In about 730 BC, the kings in northern Egypt surrendered to Pi, king of Kush. After his conquest of Egypt, Pi declared himself pharaoh of the Kingdom of Kush, which reached from Meroë in Sudan to the Mediterranean, Kushties ruled Egypt for about 91 years, nearly a century. In Egypt, Kushties became the pharaohs of Egypt and started the 25th dynasty. Historians usually refer to them black pharaohs to differentiate them from the other native Egyptian rulers who were much lighter. Some scholars claim that this was a dark time for Egypt when Nubian culture supplanted traditional Egyptian values, but this cannot be supported because the so-called Nubian culture, by this time, was highly Egyptianized and Egyptian culture adopted by Nubians. The 25th dynasty was highly Egyptianized, using the Egyptian language and writing system as their way of record and exhibiting an unusual devotion to Egypt's religious, artistic, and literary traditions. Wore Egyptian clothes and built pyramids, made statues similar to Egyptian statues. After the emperors Sargon II and Sennacherib defeated attempts to gain a foothold in the Near East, their successors Esarhaddon and Ashurbanipal invaded, defeated, and drove out the Nubians. In the Assyrian conquest of Egypt, the Kushite War against Assyrians resulted in the end of Kushite power in Egypt and the conquest of Egypt by the Neo-Assyrian Empire. The 25th dynasty ended with Tantamani, and he was replaced by the Assyrians with a puppet king known as Nekhau I. Nekhau's son, Psamtik I, threw off Assyrian rule and founded the 26th dynasty, which is the last native Egyptian dynasty to rule Egypt before the Achaemenid Empire invaded Egypt. After Psamtik I came Nekhau II, who was preceded by Psamtik II, who conducted an important expedition against the kingdom of Kush. He sent a large force against Kush and initiated destruction of the memorials of the 25th dynasty in Egypt by hacking out their names and the emblems of royalty from their statues and reliefs and destroyed their towns, temples, and monuments. Finally, about 590 BCE, Egypt invaded Kush, again destroying its capital city, Napata. The Kushites named Meroë their new capital because it was 300 miles south of Napata, safely out of Egypt's reach. Meroë helped Kush remain an important center of trade. Most routes took traders through Kush, and Kush traded with neighbors and distant lands. In the mid-4th century, the Axumites invaded and sacked Meroë. The Axumites then converted the Nubians to Christianity, establishing the authority of the Coptic Church in the area, and founded new Nubian Christian kingdoms, such as Nobatia, Alodia, and Makuria. And the kingdom of Kush was dissolved and had come to an end.